This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
And welcome back, everyone. Life isn't always easy. Relationships are the basis for our lives. We crave that connection with others. And sometimes there is conflict that comes from connection. And with that, there is mediation. Somebody that, I guess best description I'm going to come up with quickly here is somebody that's in the middle that helps both sides see things maybe a little bit differently or for what they are. She offers that mediation and also counseling at the same time in Canada. She's Angie Howlett from White Dove, and she's back with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well. How do you define mediation?
So mediation is kind of the it's technically considered an informal process, but I do feel that lots of the time people are quite intimidated when they hear mediation, when they think mediation, because a lot of people sense that it's very court-based or it's just got kind of this like legal connotation or this legal tone to it, which for me as a social worker, mediation and conflict resolution is actually covered under the scope of practice for social workers in Canada. And so my lens is very different. I take the holistic, the biopsychosocial model of how conflict impacts our relationships, how it impacts our mental health, our stress load, and how that informs how we deal with one another. And I take that and it's just more of the holistic process rather than the legal process. And so that's really what sets my support or services apart from, say, a lawyer doing that, because it gives you a more, not just a holistic lens, but I think a more human lens.
Would you be the person somebody may turn to is, let's say you have a couple, things aren't working out, talking about divorce, don't want to go to an attorney and all those fees. Would they go to you to mediate some kind of a settlement? Now, you're not on the legal side of things, but would that also work?
It could in some contexts. So I'll just explain a little bit. I don't know about other provinces in Canada, and I'm not sure about our, obviously the US, but in Saskatchewan, couples do have to attempt an early family dispute process before they petition the courts for divorce. That being said, the spirit of mediation is supposed to be mutual, and it's supposed to be anchored in respect and collaboration for the best outcome, not just for themselves, but typically if there's children involved, for the children too. I often say that though I'm working with the parents aren't my clients, it's the kids. It's the kids that are my client, because the focus needs to be on how are the kids going to get out of this as unscathed as possible. And remember the last time we talked about, toxic stress and family separation and how that can have a huge impact on not only children's mental health, but also on their physical health outcomes later on in life. So, I often say that it's the kids that are my clients. But so the point or the spirit of mediation is to resolve some issues. In Canada, we have what's called the Section 7 expenses of the Divorce Act. And those are typically things that the judge, they have to address, but those are things that the families should be willing to come to an agreement on their own about. And so, it can work to come to mediation, but when you require it, the early family dispute resolution process, it turns a collaborative process into an adversarial process. And I often say that people who are in the very early stages of separation are not ready to be collaborative, and they really just want to fight. And so oftentimes it becomes a big challenge in reconciling. But my goal is not necessarily to reconcile, but where can we find the common ground? Where can we find the best outcomes for each individual and the kids, and move on into court, into as least stressful of a way as possible.
So what's the difference between couples counseling and mediation?
You know what? Essentially, they're really very similar. It's kind of funny. So there was this in my social work program, there was this required reading called Nonviolent Communication, The Language of Life by Marshall Rosenberg. And that was a required reading in our communications class, which was really the foundation, the essence of counseling. So then in my mediation training, this book is so great. It's really recommended. It wasn't a required reading. And of course, remember, lots of lawyers are also mediators too. Nonviolent Communication, The Language of Life by Marshall Rosenberg. And I kind of shook my head a little bit. I said, I've already read that. That was a required reading for me. So to be honest, it's really not a whole lot different. You take the same kind of, I guess, skills. You learn the same things, how to properly communicate, what does respect mean, etc. And you would apply them in both contexts. Mediation is slightly more formal in the sense that it does follow up a very specific framework, a very specific kind of template, and kind of has each a 1 hour intake, a 3 hour mediation process, and then follow up as needed. But counseling may take a little bit more time. Oftentimes it's usually just an hour to an hour and a half. I do suggest 2 hours because you can get into a little bit more stuff without having to be like, okay, time's up. But yeah, I take the mediation framework and kind of apply that to the counseling sessions, one session at a time, or maybe 2 sessions at a time, just depending on how things are going.
Would you say that with mediation, there is a defined goal? Let's say, for example, couples breaking up, getting divorced, you have a goal. We're trying to settle this, maybe who gets what. But when it comes to couples counseling, we're just trying to help them communicate better. Maybe there's a little, conflict resolution along the way. But it seems like with mediation, we have a very clear, predefined goal. I'm just looking at it from far. It seems sometimes that's the way it goes, but I don't know if that's the way it is.
Generally speaking, that is how it is supposed to go or intended to go. The process really helps like myself personally as the mediator and the parties or the participants along in focusing or in coming to solutions for the issue. So that is the goal, and the process kind of helps us along with that. There are defined goals in couples counseling. That being said, they tend to shift a lot more over time because it's less like, for instance, in mediation, what I like to do is put everything in a PowerPoint and send it to the participants before they, like, each of their agenda items or the items that they wish to discuss and that they want to find a solution for. I put that in a PowerPoint for them to review ahead of time. But counseling isn't as formal in that way. Like, I don't have as much documented in terms of like, this is the goal that we're working on. That being said, that is what's supposed to happen. But counseling, I think that there's more of an opportunity to get into some of those, maybe past hurts, maybe a little bit of past trauma. That's very important. Sometimes undiagnosed mental health issues can be at play there in counseling. And so counseling gives us a little bit more of an opportunity to dive into those things.
Would you say that many, many times what's going on there when it's counseling is directly connected to their childhood?
Often,
Yeah.
oftentimes, as I've said, before, the way that we learn how to interact with others comes from our relationships with our folks, with our grandparents, with our siblings, with our aunties and uncles, our cousins. So if there's family trauma, if there's intergenerational trauma at play, there's lots on my mom's side of the family, for instance, and that happens to be the more dysfunctional side, right? That does inform how we respond to stress, how our fight or flight instinct. What do we do in that situation? Do we fight? Do we flee? Do we freeze? What do we do in that situation? And most of it is learned, but then there is kind of that genetic predisposition to dealing with conflict in a maladaptive way, I guess I'll say.
What do you think comes up aside from communication? Because that's often been said, communication is key. And there may be challenges there when relationships go south. What else is going on there that you find when it's couples counseling?
Finances are a huge one.
Wow.
But to be honest, that mostly comes down to some kind of a deficiency or a discrepancy in communication styles or preferences. Either process, counseling or mediation, the best outcome relies on open and honest communication. If that doesn't exist, then the goals that the participants had to begin with, and even my goals for, the outcome of the process, won't be met without the willingness to be honest and to be challenged in, maybe your position. Because, like, for instance, I do have a couple right now who they are not communicating, at home. A lot of the communications come through me, actually. That being said, their largest concern is finances. I'd be willing to wager that if they set aside, maybe an hour a week, let's look at how our finances are going and see how quickly your communication shifts. It would be really interesting to, assess the relationship there.
What's going on there with finances and relationships? So two people get together, everything's great in the beginning. Maybe they pool their resources, their financial resources. Is it as time goes on, they realize that maybe one is very careful with spending, the other one is not, and there we have the challenge. The things become revealed later in the relationship when it comes to finances?
Revealed later, and maybe things just change, like priorities might change. Expectations around, is the one parent gonna work? Is one person gonna stay home? Things like economic, the economy, right? Basically the economic climate, we can't control that. So how are we going to communicate our change in expectations given the shift in, the economy or whatever the case, that does impact our life. So oftentimes priorities, expectations, assumptions, hopes or goals might shift without the communication happening there. And so that piece is really important. Like I talked about in an earlier segment, the relationship agreement, the Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper's relationship agreements, there's all a list of terms and conditions, expectations that we have going into something. But when something doesn't work for us anymore, we often don't say, hey, can we talk about this? This isn't working for me. Instead, we've agreed to something and things kind of maybe might get swept under the rug or pushed aside. And then that resentment starts to build. So that's why negotiating and renegotiating, it's very important. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Do you find that it should be determined or defined at the beginning of the relationship? Like
Yes.
I've had these discussions with friends where some have separate finances, separate accounts.
Yeah.
And then others like, why would I never do that? No, it's, we got married. It goes into one account. And then the others would say, well, no, it works here. But then the others would say, all right, well, I'm going to buy him a gift and it's going to come from our joint account. It's not really coming from me. It's coming from joint. Um, it can go in
Yeah.
all different directions. Define it in the beginning. That's what I'm detecting from you.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, well, we didn't talk about finances, but my husband and I, 3 dates in, I was like, okay, look, these are my expectations. This is what I want. And if you're not willing to, meet those things, then I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time, but I just don't want to go forward with this and then have one or both of us be disappointed and then go through a bunch of heartbreak. So undoubtedly, yes, it is extremely important to lay all of that on the line, because if you don't communicate your expectations, you're
Yeah.
going to let someone down.
So we're talking about relationships. I've heard this, that we all, as adults, evaluate or reevaluate our relationships every 5 years, give or take, not an exact number. And that whole term, the 7-year itch,
Yeah.
is because after we evaluate every 5 years, we typically take up to 2 years to make a decision what we're going to do and or what that person's going to do. And if it's to end the relationship or be unfaithful, that's the 7-year itch. That's what I've heard. What do you think?
Well, I would prefer to think that people don't, reevaluate where they are in their relationship.
Unintentionally. It's just,
For
they don't
sure.
even know they're doing it. It's just, they start thinking after 5 years, is this working for me? Is that working?
Well, and that should be a regular question, right? Is this,
Interesting.
how is this relationship working for me? Maybe not, is it working for me? Because I would hate to see somebody think after 5 years, is this relationship working for me? Maybe not. Who are you going to impact? Not just yourself, not just your spouse. If you have kids, would that impact something? So more so, I think we could frame it with the question of, how is this relationship working for me? How can it be better?
Mm,
what what are my needs? What are my expectations there? Because when we frame it in that way, how do I feel? What do I need? Then that puts the onus on us and not shifting the blame to the partner who's not meeting
mm.
those needs, especially if we haven't communicated those. So more so, I think the question should be, how is this working for me? And what do I want to see done differently? So yeah, I mean, but and 5 years, maybe it could be 2 years, maybe there could be a decided, okay, we got to check in on this relationship. Maybe that's once a year we're gonna do like a weekend getaway, and we're gonna look at some things that are going on in our relationships and see what the path we're going to carve a path forward. We're going to see how that's going to work. And absolutely, it's worth saying, okay, let's give this 6 months and revisit it then. Absolutely.
I like the way you put that, where it's, what do I need? How can I change things for the better for both of us? As opposed to, you don't do this, and when you do that, and taking responsibility. I heard this recently. When you take responsibility for your life, you take back your power.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Wow. So tell us the area in Canada where you can help people, and even on the mediation side of things, can you do it virtually?
I can do mediation virtually. Yeah, often in person is ideal, but sometimes it doesn't work, especially when we're looking at, like, has there been physical violence? Does one party not
Sure.
feel safe? So absolutely, mediation is an option. Virtual mediation is an option. I am registered and recognized and licensed in the province of Saskatchewan, under the Alternative Dispute Resolution Institute of Saskatchewan, and then also the Saskatchewan Association of Social Workers. I have let my licenses lapse in the provinces of Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador. But that being said, I've already been provided permit to practice electronically. So I would be willing to look into and explore how to become registered again in those areas. It would be very easy in Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador to get that process going.
What do you want somebody to know if they're having some challenges in a relationship? Because that's what we're talking about here, couples counseling and mediation. And maybe they're uncomfortable, talking to a counselor. What would you want them to know?
I guess this is not meant to sound harsh. This is just a reality check. I guess like Dr. Phil always says, you can't change what you don't acknowledge, right? So get in there, just book the first appointment, talk things out. What are the issues that are happening with you? And then you can explore that in as gentle a way as possible. It's also okay for you to tell your counselor, your mediator, I need to be validated, or I need to be challenged, or, whatever it is that you're needing in that time to be able to transform your relationship.
And I have to believe too, for those that have never done this before, maybe uncomfortable about sharing information and things like that, this is what you do. I'm sure you've heard just about everything. It's not this, and no judgment. It's like, the doctor, where somebody's afraid to disrobe for an exam. They're not, they don't even, this will just, it doesn't even matter. It's another day at the job, Yeah,
but, exactly. No, and that's just it. There's no judgment. I'm not here to pass any judgment on anybody. I want to see your relationships thrive.
Oh, I love that. How do we find you?
www.whitedovecounseling.ca.
Wonderful talking with you today. Thanks for breaking that down, the difference between counseling and mediation, and looking forward next time we get together.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.